Hello, everyone, and welcome to Theory into Practice. I am Dan Scott, and today I am very pleased and excited and honored to have my next guest. She does not know this yet, but it was my interaction with her that really drove me to do more with emergency management and actually look outside what I was already doing to do it at a bigger level. When I met her, and I'm not going to say her name yet, when I met her, we were it was at my very first IAM conference. It was when it was in Vegas for the last time. And what got my attention is I'm a big old nerd, everybody. If you don't know this, I like Harry Potter, I like Marvel, I like Star Wars, and I like Disney. And when she said she was the global emergency management or crisis emergency management director for Disney, my ears perked up and I made contact. And in doing so, she invited me to be a part of an exercise that she was actually doing at Disney. And Andrea Davis, CEM, has a wonderful name in emergency management, but her background in general, working with Red Cross and FEMA and Disney and Walmart, and now with her own business, the Resiliency Initiative. I would like to welcome Andrea Davis to the show.
Thank you so much, Dan, and so thank you for that warm and wonderful introduction.
It really does, and I mean it 100%. It was my interactions with you, and you invited me outside of my own little world because I worked for a little college at the time, and so I had 5 campuses. It wasn't that, but it was little enough for me, and I was pretty focused on just that little area. But when I got to see it done at the Disney Corporation, it really changed the way I thought about the way I could apply doing emergency management, and it really brought me a new line of thinking in not only my desire to do more, but to be a part of more, because you allowed me to come in and be an evaluator of that or an observer of that drill. And it made me want to do more of that. And it ultimately led me to where I am today and leaving the organization I was a part of to do it at a larger scale. And now I'm doing this and getting to talk to you and actually give you that ultimately let you know that knowledge that you helped shape where I am, and whether you meant to do it or intentionally or not, you did it. And I wanted you to know that.
Yes, that is so awesome to hear, because I can actually really relate to that, Dan, because I had, before my job with Disney, I had always been a public servant. So I had been with FEMA down in New Orleans for hurricane recovery. Before that, the Federal Reserve as their emergency manager. And I truly, when I saw the Disney job advertised, it was like, what kind of problems does Mickey have? I couldn't translate like my traditional emergency management background into the private sector. And I felt like I went on this journey when I got that job of like, you can't be doing like that exercise that you came to. It was an active shooter exercise, and that we engaged with all the local law enforcement community there and brought in the folks that were around the Disney studio to participate, because you can't be doing this type of planning in a vacuum. And I was just like, that's emergency management, right? All of everything that we do, even whether it's private sector or public sector, we can't be doing the planning in a vacuum. And it was just eye-opening for me to learn that of just, it's my job to protect Disney and its assets and make sure they have the plans, internal plans to do that. But I would have a huge miss if I didn't connect up with the local communities. And the same with the campuses you were dealing with. There were people outside those campuses that something could be happening there that's going to impact, and so I'm so thankful that had such a great impact on you.
I'm truly appreciative, but and you hit on really what I would like to focus the discussion on, because you have your experience level is from working in government, working in the private sector, and working at small scales to large scales, and ultimately how we apply emergency management. So maybe just give us a little background on your evolution through emergency management and how that's actually helped you with in working in different facets, whether it be government, private, nonprofit, whatever it may have been.
Sure. No, thanks, Ken. So I started way back. My first job in emergency management was in 1999, because if your listeners will recall, in 1999, the world was going to end because of Y2K. And so there was a big focus on get everybody getting some plans. And I had no idea what emergency preparedness was. I had actually just dropped out of law school at the time, and I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was looking at old school classified ads in the newspaper, and I saw this advertisement they were looking for a trainer to work with nonprofits throughout the city and county of San Francisco, who's been affiliated position to the county's Office of Emergency Management, and to teach emergency preparedness. And I was like, this is fascinating. And like I said, I didn't know anything about it. But, and this is what gave me like the courage to apply for this job. It really was attractive because my whole job was to travel to these nonprofits throughout the city and county. And it was a great way for me to learn my new environment where I had just moved. And I had at the time been substitute teaching. I had kindergartners and fourth graders. And so I used that as my pitch for why I was perfect for this job, because I didn't kill any of the kids. And so I felt that might be like a good thing to teach emergency preparedness. So I got a laugh out of the hiring manager, who happened to be a gentleman by the name of Lou Canton. He was the director of the Office of Emergency Management at the time. He's still a friend and mentor of mine. And it was the conversation, he said, that the reason why I got the job, because he felt very strongly that the emergency manager's job is to coordinate and facilitate subject matter experts to solve a problem. And that really resonated with me. And he said, I'll get you he was a FEMA guy before his job with the city. He said, I'll get you all the formal FEMA training to get you the background to understand ICS and all of that. But it's much more on the soft skills. And if you can convince the fire chief that he needs the police chief, let alone public health or debris management or any of the other city players, you've done an amazing job, because you are conducting this entire response. And he said it's harder on the preparedness side, because when your traditional responders are so used to putting out that fire and getting them around a table to think through the problem before it happens is even harder. And I was like, oh, I really was challenged. This was really exciting. So I got the job, and I was in the nonprofit space for a bit. I took a part-time opportunity with the Salvation Army doing as their emergency manager in San Francisco, and then with the Volunteer Center. And then there was an opening in the federal government at the Federal Reserve. So I went on to be their emergency manager, because post September 11th, there was a lot of opportunities, especially in the federal space, for emergency managers to help with the federal plans to tie them back into the federal national response plan before it became the framework. And so I just hopped to a new opportunity, because I, at the time, was one of the few people that actually had the knowledge. So I go from knowing nothing in emergency management to then now somehow being, oh, you've done all this community planning. That's what we really want you to do for us. And I was with the Federal Reserve when Katrina occurs. And I remember us having a Federal Reserve branch in New Orleans that was completely unimpacted by the flooding or the hurricane, but we were significantly impacted from an operational standpoint, because the armored carriers that carry the currency to and from the Federal Reserve couldn't get in, and they aren't actually owned by the Federal Reserve, they're owned by the banks. So the flow of currency for the region was stopped, and there was no contingency plans. There was no way, if anybody just saw the videos of what immediately following Katrina, nothing was getting in and out. And you don't really think about that side of that kind of the emergency response from a hurricane, right? It's always the immediate life safety and getting people to a safe place, and then food and shelter. But then when we're starting to lean towards the recovery of a region, you need to get the flow of money going. And I remember little old me is seeing all these wire transfers go back and forth into Western unions, and we're trying significantly to get money to any open store and ATM so people could actually get money. We didn't know that the American Red Cross was giving their disaster payments. They were sending these payments to the Western unions that were open. And because we had no understanding, we didn't know there was an MOU between the Red Cross and Western Union, because it's the Federal Reserve. You don't think about them like an emergency response. And so that ended up, that lack of knowledge, that lack of coordination ended up delaying payments for almost 5 days, because we at the Fed wanted to redirect them to other locations. And so that really got me thinking about how the most critical part of emergency management is truly what my first boss, Lou Canton, said. It's this whole coordination and getting everybody around the table to talk this through, which is really hard, Dan, as in the middle of a crisis, when people are in need of help. But then always trying to look forward to helping the recovery side is really difficult. And During that time frame, I fell in love with New Orleans, and I applied to 12 different jobs with FEMA. I basically was going to beat them down until they hired me. And I was so on job 12, my 12th one that I interviewed for, the Deep Horizon oil spill occurred. So this is 5 years post Katrina. And I still remember a good colleague and friend who I brought him on to my team at Disney. He came into my office and said to me, I think you're going to get that job with FEMA because the oil spill had just occurred. And sure enough, they offered me the position of external affairs director to tell the story of the recovery efforts at year 5, right after the oil spill. Finally, there was somebody that was actually hated more than FEMA at the time. So I got that job. And another amazing opportunity to be able to completely transform like an image. And this was a distinctly different job than emergency management, going from the planning side of it or the training and exercise, and then into now the public affairs side. And when the bad thing happens, being stuck microphone in your face, talking to the media, but then also trying to recover a brand that had been so negatively impacted. Fortunate again, amazing boss who really took heart to some of my crazy ideas of what if we went into communities and asked them what they would like and how they would recover, as opposed to the government telling them what they need, and which was a huge leadership opportunity for me, Dan, that I learned because I went in, I was so excited about this job. I packed up my little Z3, couldn't be more California car with 2 suitcases and my cat, Mr. Boo, and drove from San Francisco to New Orleans for this job. So excited because I knew what to do. I knew how to help people. I'm going to do it. 3 days, Dan, they hated me. I was called Frisco Red. They just despised me because I literally violated my own principles of ask people what they want. And I was just sitting there telling them, like, we got to do this. We got to do this. So after licking my wounds a bit, I made the pitch to my boss and we went on this huge community engagement campaign, and it truly transforms the recovery. 300 ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings occurred in a 2.5-year period when there was maybe a couple a year. And that was so amazing, like to just be part of that, to like physically see the dynamics change of a region, go from absolute devastation to parks open and like kids would never even know what that came from. It was such a great experience to be part of that. And I was really thinking, Dan, that was my high point for my career because it was so meaningful. I loved the work I was doing, even after the rough start, but it was good. I learned those lessons. But then it's federal government. Sometimes being part of government can be frustrating on days. When I had a particularly frustrating day in the US government, and this job for the Walt Disney Company, the director of global crisis management, posts on IEM's website. And so I look at that and I go, truly, Mickey Mouse, what kind of problems does he have? Dan, I was just like, really almost like mocking it. And I'm like, I got to apply for this. So, lifelong dream was to work for the Walt Disney Company. I just never thought I would have the skill set that apply for it. Throw my name in the hat, go through the interview process. 9 months later, I get the job. And Dan, I can't tell you the amazing growth opportunity and the experience. Went to 49 different countries in my tenure with Disney. And my focus was really the basics, making sure all of our executives, no matter where they were on the globe, that they understood what their role was during a crisis. And that went from not only the executive base, but any of our traveling productions, making sure, that from, you had mentioned being a fan of Star Wars and Marvel, that each production knew what they had to do in a crisis situation, from a medical emergency to something bigger, because they would film in remote locations. And it was my job to build that program and to train and focus on, and just the growth to learn like cultural nuances, to make sure that I'm relevant, to build programming that would resonate. Was distinctly different what we would do, say, in Tokyo compared to India. And big areas for Disney, there's Tokyo Disneyland, and in India, actually, Disney produces more movies in India than in Hollywood because of Bollywood. And it was awesome. It was completely awesome. And then on January 6th, 2020, Dan, before we knew anything that was going to come our way, I took a new opportunity because I saw firsthand what Walmart had done to the response of Hurricane Katrina. And I knew the predecessor who had the position actually formed the department, and he took a new opportunity. And I called him and I asked what he thought about me, if I'd be a good fit. I got the job and I moved. I left Disney in Southern California to Bentonville, Arkansas. Started as Walmart's Senior Director of Global Emergency Management. And then it was within 2 days, Dan, it was like standing on train track, watching this train come at me and you can't move. And it was at that moment in time, I learned the scope and how massive Walmart was, seeing our operations and stores in China impacted, and calling my friends at FEMA saying, hey, what are we doing? And nothing, obviously, because nothing was happening to us in January. And to have been given the opportunity to almost take center stage, like all emergency managers in 2020 and 2021, for the world's largest retailer, from COVID to the unprecedented civil unrest, to a hurricane season that went into the Greek alphabet, then winter storms in Texas that went all the way to the East Coast, and having one of the largest big rig trucks companies that, at the helm, which is a great resource, obviously, from when Walmart needs to get resources in and out of the community. But when we were dealing with changing government orders from being distinctly different from local city to a county sometimes, to a state, and then the feds, if you can imagine, Dan, as a truck driver trying to navigate 5 different states on any given day and having to deal with different types of regulations and access, it was just amazing to see how Walmart's leadership would operate in that, and said, fine, this is going to be our policy, and this is what we're going to be doing from a consistent standpoint. And that's when you saw the social distancing and everything come out, and it was driven by the private sector. And it was amazing to see that, because here's an instance where I almost went 180, right? I didn't know how my skills would be relevant coming from the government service into the private sector. And now here's the private sector pushing and leading the way from the response, because in a time where there was lack of understanding and somebody just needed to pick up the helm. I happened to be at the world's largest company. So that was amazing.
Yeah, and I believe it. I remember during the time too that you were making that pivot to Walmart, and then all the changes that kept coming because of the private sector and the things that we're doing. The government started to follow suit, and it was actually a really great thing to watch. And ultimately, as they say, a Monday morning quarterback or armchair quarterbacking, or perspective 2020 when it comes to after the fact. But it was good to watch and see happening. And it ultimately, too, one of the things that I really wanted to give the audience and the people who are listening or watching is, because you went from the private sector, very small area, to a more large scale area working with FEMA, to then ultimately very larger scale working with Disney. Even though it was a private organization, it was a global position you had to work, and the same thing with Walmart. So how did that little, your evolution of going through those, ultimately it was that each one helped you build on the other, and then as well using your background, there's a little diversity there as far as like where you came from and learning from nothing, and how you applied it to the emergency management profession in general. How did that help you to get to where you are now, which is now you are the owner and CEO of your company, the Resiliency Initiative, to where you are actually applying at a different level. And I feel, and this is actually, so everybody's listening and watching, this is a conversation we're going to go a little bit deeper into when we talk about leadership in the next segment. But I really wanted to give Andrea time to give us her perspective on how that experience led to where she is today.
I'd have to say first, Dan, just to the audience, never fear like the new opportunity. That I know it can sometimes, when you look at something, it can be either daunting or scary, or you can immediately say, oh, I'm not qualified for it. I somehow was born without that gene. I can tend to just jump in without kind of really thinking it through. And I'm really glad I did, because this, even thinking through leaving San Francisco to go to FEMA in New Orleans, like I knew I had a skill set that I felt could be helpful. Now, where I went wrong is that I didn't take a step back and figure out how I could best apply that and support people. And so I have used kind of those walls I've hit as to learn from them, I hope. I don't want to keep repeating them, but I just think my ability to, like, when I saw that Disney job go, one, it was out of curiosity, right? Because I seriously didn't know really what that job was. But then to go through this interview process, and like this, they're talking the globe, and I'm to apply what I know to this, but then adapt it to make it relevant for this new environment. And so just having that capacity to be able to just admit you don't know what you don't know, and just take it in and then truly listen and apply what you have learned through your career. And when I decided to start my own company, it was really a side project. I was still with Disney at the time. I started it in May of 2019. And it was my way of giving back. I wanted to go a little bit back to my roots and help with like local community planning, help nonprofits having a business continuity plan, how to keep them in business. And then same with the small business community, because my dad had a diner growing up and it was always hand to mouth, right? We were lucky we had a fire extinguisher. That was their emergency plan. And so I wanted to help just use what I had learned so far on just simple tips, right? Keeping it super simple of like, your business plan should just include some continuity, like how you're going to stay in business. And talk about almost feeling like a crystal ball fortune teller a little bit, because what was in the most relevant thing as we come into 2020, especially with the small businesses and having to close their doors, and we're still seeing the economic impact from that. And I obviously am overwhelmed with my new job at Walmart, and so put my company on the back burner. But I had a couple friends get laid off, and so I was able to give them the reins and say, hey, let's just use this as a vehicle to help. And it was amazing. We were able to help a dance studio pivot to an online format that they'd never done before, to teach dance via Zoom. Worked with a writing stable to figure out evacuation plans when the county sent everybody home, and with possible wildfires, because those don't happen in California ever. And so it was like an amazing just like opportunity to just see just this impact that you can help. We help keep businesses in business, which is so vital. Going back to what I was saying about Katrina, like the recovery side of helping once you get past the life safety. And Dan, in all honesty, it was never, and I did not think it was on my vision board to be running my own company. It was more, like I said, a side gig. Then there was a all call by the United Nations looking for businesses to help plan their disaster risk conference that they just had in Bali, Indonesia. And the Resiliency Initiative was selected. And the topic we were selected to help plan was how to tear down silos between the private sector and public sector. And I thought I was uniquely qualified to help with that, because I had worked in the different realms, and especially with big companies, to try to engage the global platform to have planning done in a different way, through a different lens. And so I felt the universe, Dan, it's telling me, Andrea, you need to go and just jump all in. So I left Walmart beginning of April of 2022. I'm president and CEO of the Resiliency Initiative. And for 4 months, it has been an amazing adventure. We just hired 2 interns to support us. And I have an amazing executive director, and I know you've interviewed her as well, Lorraine Schneider. I had stole her from UCLA to my Disney team, and now I stole her from Disney to work for me. And boy, has it been an adventure so far.
Oh, I believe it. And it's one of those things too that I feel like you're doing such great work with what you're doing in the Resiliency Initiative. That the fact that you would jump off of such a high, it's high visibility and an executive job at a very large corporation to say, I want to give back to the community, which back to my roots is amazing. And it's one of those areas too that I constantly am surprised at with certain people in our profession. And you touched on it really well. But I would like you to go a little bit deeper into briefly, because I know we're rounding out the show, or at least this segment of it. But we're seeing more and more executive level positions in emergency management or resiliency across the industry, whether it be private, governmental, wherever it is, educational. We're seeing more and more at the top tiers and levels, which are ultimately in decision-making positions to be able to make decision-making authority and be able to have teams under them. And these are things we don't see all the time. What is it, a little bit of just a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiration you would give to somebody that may be looking towards those positions and says, I don't think I'm qualified, or could they potentially do to make themselves qualified for those roles as they continue to show up?
No, that's really great question, Dan, because I do think it's hard if somebody's coming from nonprofit world or public sector to figure out how to translate their skills into the private sector. I see it a lot of times with military folks too, trying to come into the corporate universe, and it's just making subtle word changes. And I learned my time, especially when I made that big leap to Disney. I was using my private sector kind of stick, right? You don't follow what FEMA says, you don't get grant dollars, you have to have very specific verbiage on how to do something. And so I had a little teeth. When a movie makes $1 billion in a weekend, they don't really care about your little emergency plan. And so I had to figure out a way to be relevant to my new audience. And so speaking to the bottom line is the most impactful way, when, especially on your resume, when you put on there, it's you don't know how to write business continuity plans and emergency plans. You're at the table because people know you can do that. Why should a movie producer spend 30 seconds with you to have a conversation, which is probably $1 million in his mind, and you're going to save his bottom line? And it's almost, you have to flip the script a little bit. One of the best ways to be relevant in the private sector, especially with C-suite, is get 30 minutes, do a quick little tabletop, full well knowing that they have no plans, and just let's walk through your protocol on what you were doing. I did this exercise. I'm not going to say with whom. It was up in the Bay Area for very senior executives, simple earthquake preparedness exercise. I was given 30 minutes to talk through the protocol. Again, I knew they had none. And that within 5 minutes, one executive was under the table and having a panic attack, saying she has no idea what to do in an earthquake. She doesn't know how she communicate. And then there was this sinking feeling around the table when everybody realized the server with millions of dollars of content had no backup fail-safe. When I asked the question, what about the server? What are we going to do? That simple exercise got me buy-in to write their entire program, from preparedness, employee preparedness, to writing a plan and then doing business continuity. And so it's looking at your skill set library and making that little translation of what would be relevant to that company. And again, just keep it all about the bottom line. And obviously life safety is part of the bottom line. If you lose your employees, it's going to impact how efficient you can be, and then also huge brand impact. And I give that advice out to everybody, is just do your homework about the company and finding out their mission and what's important, and speak to that mission. And then seriously, Dan, anybody can reach out to me if they're ever thinking of jumping into the private sector. I'd gladly help them, because I feel I was just lucky at the end of the day, that I feel every job that I've had, I've just fallen into. But do that, apply for it. You're not going to know how relevant your skill set can be if you don't try for it. If you get one interview, and then I can help you with the word choices, because at the end of the day, it's just making that translation. Because any emergency manager who's been working has relevant skills. Whether you're coming from the military, whether you're coming from the federal government, you have relevant skills to the private sector.
Yeah. On that note, so for those who out there who would like to learn more or make contact with you, how would they do that? Where can they find the Resiliency Initiative, and where can they find Andrea Davis?
Oh, thank you, Dan. I'm very engaged on LinkedIn. You can always find me there, but send me an email. I'm at Andrea@theresiliencyinitiative.com, and that's my website too. It's just www.theresiliency.com. Anyway, reach out to me. Happy to help.
And for everybody who's out there who may be driving, this will be in the show notes, so you can go get that information in the show notes as well. I've been given permission to put that out there as well for us. Andrea, I just want to take the time to say thank you for taking the time to come on and talk to me today. I'm really looking forward to our next discussion on leadership, but for you to be able to come on and tell us the road you take, share your experience with us, and share your insights in how we grow and develop as emergency management professional is really incredible. For all those who are listening, look for her contact information. She is definitely somebody you want to connect with and know and learn from. I am Dan Scott, and I am looking to do nothing more than to bring value to you. If you found value here today, please like, comment, and share this to someone who else could benefit from it. If you want to reach out to me, please do. You can email me, you can DM me, direct message me with any ideas, or potentially if you'd like to be a guest on Theory to Practice. I am Dan Scott. Let's get better. Let's do it together, and I'll talk to you next time.